Welcome to the channel for the first time viewers. Welcome back for my existing subscribers. Today's video is going to be focused around those of you that are looking to make the switch to PC like I did last year. Around this time I was doing a lot of research and I was looking at graphics cards and CPUs and different combos that would essentially give me the best experience for Rainbow Six Siege. There's going to be some more gameplay, not just Siege in here, but essentially I want to give you guys 5 tips, 5 things you need to know before making this jump to make your transition a little bit smoother and just to pretty much get you off to a quick start. Alright, so first let's get started with number 1. One of the first things I needed to learn when I first switched over to PC gaming was that Steam was not the only place to buy your games. There's GOG, there's G2A, which is a little bit less reputable than, let's say, a Steam, but GOG is a good one. I have often used Green Man Gaming, and I'm not affiliated with any of these sites, but these are just where I've gotten my games. Typically, this is how I roll. If it's an old game that Steam is selling for just way too much, like if you're coming from Xbox or PlayStation, you know exactly what I mean. They'll have a digital version of a game for like full price still, and it's like 6 years old, which makes 0 sense. But if you went to GameStop and got like a physical copy, the thing will be like $5. So games like that I typically get on G2A because usually they are like $5. I don't even get the protection plan because if something happens with the key, because everything's digital for the most part, if something happens with the key, it's not that big a deal, and usually you can email support and get a different key. So there's that, right? I go to G2A for that. For my pre-order games, I've been going to Green Man Gaming, and like I said, usually, like for instance, I got for $71 I got the season pass edition of Tomb Raider. Also got Black Ops for like $54. It's just a little bit cheaper to get the games. I've actually even bought one console game on Green Man Gaming, so it's just a little bit cheaper for the newer games. And then you do have some Steam sales, which are huge. Like in the summer and the winter, they have big sales where some titles are like 70% off, and some big like AAA games are like 50% off. So always keep an eye out for that. Never, like, once you decide you want a game, check the different angles and see where you'll get the best deal. So Steam is not the only place that you can get your games. So the second thing is going to be strategic where you enter the market. So educate yourself on the systems that you want to get, as far as the graphics card, like I said, and the CPU and what they're capable of. And some things, like for instance, know that if you go with Ryzen, it's better to have faster RAM. Just stuff that you normally learn from just watching some bigger YouTubers. If you're not into the PC gaming scene yet, then I'll get you a link of people that I kind of go to for techie type stuff. So there's one for deals. It tells you about good deals and whether something's a good value, and then he does benchmarks. One thing you'll notice in the PC community is that people will do a lot of benchmarks, which is essentially testing out a game on X system with X CPU and GPU combination, and then telling you the results. So that is a really good way to educate yourself on games that you're going to play, and the most popular games are typically run on all kinds of systems. So be mindful of how you jump in, because it can save you a lot of money. And for example, in my instance, I went with a Ryzen 5 1400 because it was actually an upgrade from the 6300, the FX 6300, which is a really low-end processor at this point. It was a mid-range processor back in the day, but now it's pretty much just a cheap one. So I was going to enter the market with that. I ended up going with a Ryzen 5 1400 because the games that I was going to play, after watching some benchmarks, it looked like they were going to go a lot smoother. They were going to play a lot better and at higher frame rates with that specific CPU. But what I didn't know is if I had spent another $50 and gotten a Ryzen 5 1600, I would almost be doubling my frame rates in some of the games. So what I didn't know is that, obviously the Ryzen 5 1400 is a 4-core card, or a 4-core CPU, and the 1600, it has 6 cores. So in games like Battlefield 5, right, I got it during the beta. That's when I switched. So during the beta, I was getting about 47 FPS in my experience on Ultra, right? So I had to drop some settings, and because the workload was shifting, yada yada yada, I didn't really get too many more frames by lowering the settings. Now I switched to the Ryzen 5 1600, and I was getting about 95 frames per second. So that was literally like overnight, just switching the CPU and then automatically getting another about 50 frames. Rainbow Six Siege, I used to average about 100 to 130 frames when things weren't going too hectic. With a 1600, I was pulling in about anywhere between 130 to 160, and that's just it's a really big difference. As far as my monitor's refresh rate is 144 hertz. You'll also need to factor that in. Having a good monitor is extremely important, and if you do your research and you end up getting something that has the capabilities to hit above 100 FPS, then you definitely want to make sure you get a 144 refresh rate monitor, preferably with a 1 millisecond response time. That way you can actually take advantage of those frames, because that's essentially what goes hand in hand. Otherwise, you get some things like screen tearing, or you have to limit your graphics. Either way, higher frames is always better, because there's more happening and it's a lot smoother experience, but it does have some screen tearing if your monitor can't keep up. You can also research some of that stuff. But essentially, the gist of it, be mindful of where you join the market, because if you join and you don't get enough power, then you essentially may need to upgrade very soon. I would definitely recommend, if you're like a Battlefield player, to get something with 16 gigs of RAM. Even if you have to buy another RAM stick or a RAM kit, then get 16 gigs, because that game, even though they say the minimum is going to be about 8 gigs of RAM or 6 gigs of RAM, what happens is anything else running on the system, whether it's your recording software or just Discord or anything in period, it pretty much crashes the game and just causes tons of slowdown. So 8 gigs is for some games is enough, but 8 gigs for me, I would say in general, isn't enough. So just be safe and have 16, so that way you don't have to worry about it. So let's talk about number 3. So the third thing is going to be one of the black eyes of PC gaming. Sometimes you get a game that isn't really configured for your specific build, right? Your GPU, CPU, RAM, motherboard combo, just all the stars align and they just got you good, right? So in this specific scenario, what you want to do is learn how to deal with the error codes. Typically on Windows, people shy away from looking at the error codes, or they just cancel out and try to restart everything. But if you actually look at the error code, copy it down and Google it, that's essentially how I find 99% of the fixes for my issues. And a lot of times you're not alone. So just like every other situation, just in humanity in general, you're not the only one going through it. So typically you'll find something, if you copy paste that specific error code and you put the game, as long as it's not like a day one release, I mean, sometimes you will find answers for that. But if you're playing a game and you're getting an error code, then you'll typically just type it in, and then you'll be able to find that specific fix. Usually it's not too hard to fix these things. Like, you don't need anything as far as tech knowledge, because these tutorials that end up coming up to YouTube will kind of walk you through it. They'll say, open this folder, do this, 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 and this. So dealing with error codes is going to be very critical, because that's going to impact your gaming experience. And for the most part, it's going to make it better, because you won't be getting those error codes. You'll be able to play the games that you want. Typically you run into this type of stuff with older games, because for whatever reason, systems that were out in like 2007, 2008, like I try to play like the old Splinter Cell games, they weren't running like these systems now. Like back then, like 2 gigabytes of RAM, you were like the god. Or even like 1 gigabyte of video memory, like your video card, which mine has 8 gigs alone. Back then you were doing it big with 1 gigabyte. So just to put it in perspective, like things have advanced a lot. So just be mindful of that, and pay attention when you get an error code. Write it down or copy paste it into Google, so you can stop getting them, especially if it won't let you launch a game, because sometimes it might be the settings are too high, or like the default settings they tried to assign are just like, they're no bueno. All right, so with that, we have 2 more things I want to talk about. This is more something that I would say, once you get into your feet wet and you get into PC gaming, watch out for the early access traps. There's a lot of games that come out through Steam that are in early access. If you have to pay for them, I would definitely say go into it with a mindset of, you're paying for something that you may not be able to use in a couple of months. So like Ring of Elysium, World War III as it is right now, these games, and hopefully not Insurgency, because Insurgency is the one I really, really wanted, and even like they do a really good job with a low player base. But anyways, I'm not defending that game. When you go into these games that are early access, usually they're not finished. Usually they're buggy. They're like PUBG, where you can go back to a year and a half ago and just watch all the awful videos about PUBG and how it performs so poorly, you could watch all these videos and see how early access kind of has this sour taste in gamers' mouths, because sometimes these games actually never get finished. They just get started, get the money, and you'd be able to play them for a year or 2 years and they're still in early access, missing key features. And then sometimes the developer just runs out of money or shifts focus and starts working on another project, which means that the money you spent is now wasted, because although you did get to play the game, you never got a full release, you never got a full experience. So it's like being a beta tester that you had to pay for. So anytime you see early access, try to keep it to the free games unless you're really, really interested, and then just look at it from the perspective of, I'm going into this, and if it doesn't work out, then at least I got to play the game. Because Isles of Nine was a really nice looking battle royale game. It was like a fast-paced Call of Duty, but now I think last time I looked at it, had like 7 concurrent players, and you need 50 to start a game. So 7 players across the entire world. If you paid $30 for that, I mean, I'd be pretty salty right now. All right, so the final tip is that quality only gets you so far. Okay. So what I mean by that is that the quality of your equipment will only get you so far. When you first get started, I would rather you guys put the money into quality parts, and that's what I mean, versus a high-end keyboard or a high-end mouse. Like if you're getting a $100 mouse and a $200 keyboard, you could have easily upgraded your graphics card or easily upgraded your CPU or bought 32 gigs of RAM for $300. So that's what I mean by quality will only get you so far. A lot of jokes go around the PC gaming community where people with the potato PCs, which is PCs that are subpar, really don't perform that well, they'll actually be some of the better gamers because they just have the skill. And if they had better equipment or if they had more funds, then essentially what would happen is they would just be able to, go ahead and buy better parts and be just as good as they were before, but with better equipment. So don't go all in. I would say if you're going to go with a keyboard, try to go mechanical. Try to keep your combo to, I'd say, less than $150, which is what I was able to do. I got mine. I got a Corsair keyboard for $80 at Walmart, and then a Logitech G502 mouse through Best Buy for like $50. So like I said, try to keep it to under $150, especially if you are needing more horsepower as far as your CPU goes or your GPU goes, because in the CPU game you got to think of it as like the engine of your car. To replace your engine of your car is a pretty big deal, although on PC the process is not that complicated, but it's a pretty big deal, and you got to switch out a lot of other parts. So as far as the CPU goes, when you first build your PC, just get the best one that you can at the time, and usually it'll last you for a long time. And then for GPU, I would say you can go mid-range or like a 1070 or a 2070, which is it's a bit up there, but you can get some 1070s for a good deal, or even a GTX 1080. Or if you're trying to make an investment type PC, then you may want to bump in between like a 2080 Ti or a 1080 Ti, because those two cards are going to be very, very powerful, and they'll be able to carry you over the next few generations of games. Versus like on console, we've had some pretty long console life cycles, but at the end of the day, you don't get any necessarily better graphics. They just kind of fine tune what they're doing with the engines that they have and with the hardware that you have to make the games look better. Now, usually the best leap is from like the launch level games and the end of life games, like the last games on 360 versus the first games on 360 is like where you see the graphical difference. But that type of jump happens maybe once a generation on PC. So 3 years ago or 2.5 years ago, when they launched the last cards, I think it was about 3 years ago, that's when you got that big jump like that. And now we have better reflections, we have a lot more going on, and now AMD is going to release new graphics cards as well. So just be mindful of that type of stuff. And quality is not always king when it comes to like the peripherals, but when it comes to the actual parts in your computer, you do want to make sure you get like a good power supply, a decent motherboard. Good cooling is a must, so don't cheap out on fans and stuff like that. And that's pretty much all I got, man. PC gaming is great because you have a lot of control of your settings, you have a lot of control overall of just how everything runs, and there's a lot of free software that's actually more powerful than some paid software that you would have to kind of finagle together. Like OBS is amazing. You could pretty much record in 120 FPS if you wanted to, and when you slow that down, it looks really, really good. But that's all I got for this video. You guys let me know anything that I may have missed as far as tips for somebody looking to switch over to PC in the comment section, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. You guys be easy.